Alan Moore's Watchmen. Every day the future looks a little bit darker, but the past, even the grimy parts of it, well, it just keeps on getting brighter all the time. With 2019 seeing the release of a television sequel seeking to expand and bring a contemporary viewpoint to its iconic mythos, we thought that now would be a perfect time to examine one of the most acclaimed comic books ever released, Alan Moore's 1986 opus, Watchmen. Of particular interest is how many of its central themes, intrinsically tied to the late-era Cold War period of the work's original release, still resonate just as strongly today, if not more so. Join us today as we examine apathy and social angst in Alan Moore's Watchmen. Please, sit back and enjoy today's edition of Lit Tips. For those not familiar with Watchmen's plot, a brief rundown. The setting is in a world similar to ours in many ways, but with significant differences stemming from the existence of costume heroes. For example, the recruitment of these heroes and employment of their skills during the Vietnam War leads to a laughably easy victory for the United States in the early 1970s. With the scourge of domino effect communism in Southeast Asia deterred, a Watergate evading Richard Nixon is re-elected in a landslide. 4 years later, he wins a third term, and then a fourth, and a fifth, with no sign of leaving office as of 1985 when the story begins in earnest. Meanwhile, public approbation of masked heroes plummets following the end of the war. Mass paranoia over the influence and power of the heroes, who are basically given free rein to operate outside the law in order to enforce it, leads to the passage of the Keene Act in 1977, which bans costume heroes from further taking the law into their own hands. Following the legislation, nearly every living hero goes into retirement, forced to reintegrate into normal society. Now, before continuing, let's take a closer look at the dichotomy on display here. On one hand, we see a society cognizant of the dangers implicit in letting a handful of above-average individuals enact their own unorthodox brand of justice. The Keene Act is intended to work as a stopgap, nipping the hero problem in the bud before things get too out of hand. It implicitly refers to and seeks to act as a solution to the collateral damage caused by heroes and the villains they take on in their quest to keep the world safe. Property damage, injury, and even the occasional death of innocents. The exciting set pieces glorified and put on display in more traditional comics rarely if ever address these issues. On the other hand, the same society that recognizes the need to check the power of its heroes doesn't think twice about electing one man over and over to the highest office in the land for nearly 2 decades. Regardless of your political leanings, this is not a recipe for a healthy political landscape in the long run, and it is certainly not the vision of democracy generally espoused by Americans on either side of the political aisle. The American people of Watchmen have voted to protect themselves from the men and women who have self-appointed themselves as heroes, but in turn they have put so much faith in the government to protect them that they live in an unending state of political apathy and stagnation, dutifully voting every 4 years to keep the status quo alive without any consideration for the risks this entails. One might be able to justify this apathy if it resulted in a freer, safer, more content society. This, unfortunately, is not the case at all. Though the threat of villains in the traditional comic sense has been basically eliminated, the sort of everyday crime familiar to us in the real world runs rampant. Neither the Keene Act nor Nixon's long reign have done anything to abate the staggering rates of murder, rape, and burglary in the country. What's more, America is on the brink of World War III breaking out with the USSR. The Keene Act forces the most radical former heroes to don their masks in secret, to deal out justice in the shadows and on their own terms. The primary example of this type of hero in Watchmen is Rorschach, a vigilante undeterred by the Keene Act, who dispenses brutal punishments on the criminals he encounters, all the while musing to himself about the sad state of the society in which he finds himself. Never one to quite fit in with his heroic peers even during their heyday, Rorschach is the archetype of the troubled anti-hero taken to its extreme. Despite what fan worship on certain corners of the internet may lead you to believe, Rorschach isn't a character to idolize just because of his strict dismissal of social convention. As the comic progresses, he is revealed to be a lonely, bitter man clinging to his warped ideals like a life raft. His convictions are all he has, with none of even the most tenuous connections to normal life, say, a sidekick or a sage butler for example, similar heroes have available to them to keep their actions in check. If there is anything to empathize with in Rorschach's philosophy, it's that he, in his own twisted way, feels compelled to save society from itself. Regardless of his approach, he does operate under a fairly clear personal ethos. By contrast, the character of Dr. Manhattan represents the exact opposite of this worldview. The only proper superhero in the comic, Dr. Manhattan once existed as an ordinary scientist who, through an experiment gone awry, now exists as an omnipotent, all-knowing being. In short, a god. He attempts at first to carry on living a semblance of a normal life, but finds himself increasingly disconnected from humanity and its trivial concerns. Eventually, he leaves Earth entirely, choosing instead to observe its inhabitants from the cosmos. Unlike Rorschach, who is willing to do whatever it takes regardless of ethics to clean up the streets, Dr. Manhattan completely checks out from the human race. He and Rorschach do share one important quality, however, in that they both subvert familiar comic tropes. In the same way that Rorschach can be viewed as the ultimate anti-hero, Dr. Manhattan works as a commentary on the near-invincible God Among Us paragon embodied in characters like Superman. He doesn't see his abilities as a gift that can be used to save humanity from itself, nor does he seek to share his unfathomable enlightenment with it. Two arguments can be made here. First, Dr. Manhattan's indifference to lower life forms is an inherent characteristic of his newfound godhood. To expect him to care about humanity is as unreasonable as expecting ourselves to care about every individual insect or microscopic organism surrounding us. The second argument, however, might be made that because many other comics go to great lengths to humanize their superpowered protagonists, that Dr. Manhattan's decision to no longer engage with mankind perhaps originates from a very human flaw he can't let go of: selfishness. Regardless of which argument is correct, it is clear that apathy is certainly the one trait that Dr. Manhattan shares with the mortals of Earth. As we have seen, his detachment from them mirrors the passivity humans have towards their own autonomy. The American citizenry of the Watchmen world give themselves up to the authority of an unchanging leadership without hesitation. This leadership has their support because it has managed to eliminate a few existential threats, but these same voters are complicit in the rise of new hazards by failing to hold the leaders accountable for the remaining issues that still plague the populace. Watchmen and the themes it addresses are very much of their time. In the 3 decades since the comic's publication, the world has changed in ways that were unpredictable to Moore and his readers. The Cold War is long over, replaced by entirely new conflicts and threats. In our modern, constantly interconnected and monitored world, the infamous quote, "Who watches the Watchmen?" seems if not trite, then at least short-sighted. A more pertinent concern is, who watches the data collectors? But the most enduring theme of the comic is one that is applicable to any era: the need to actively engage with the world and to be conscious of one's own role and effect on society in the future. Moore elaborated on this concept in a 1987 interview with the Comics Journal, saying, "This is not anti-Americanism, it's anti-Reaganism. My personal feeling, because I'm the writer and could do anything that I want, is that at the moment a certain part of Reagan's America isn't scared. They think they're invulnerable. There's this incredible up-mood that leads at its worst excesses to things like the Libyan bombing and things like that, and they worry me and frighten me. The society that just thinks that they can do whatever they want because they're invulnerable, they're not afraid, and they can gloss over the terror of the nuclear stockpiles, the world situation and all that and just think, hey, we're doing alright, we're okay." We hope that you enjoyed this edition of Lit Tips. As always, hit that like button if you like what we're doing, subscribe for more videos on literature from your favorites to the plain obscure, hit that bell if you want to be notified when videos drop, and leave a comment with your thoughts on this video along with suggestions for any books or authors you would like us to cover in future episodes. Until next time, keep reading.